Match betting is very popular, and it's no wonder that it's popular because all you need to do is follow some simple instructions, place a bet somewhere, hedge that position, and you walk away with some free cash. That sounds good, and it has been good for a number of people, and that is why it's so popular. Oddsmonkey recently announced that they'd had over 500,000 customers. You can see just how wildly popular this particular method of betting is. So why on earth are we suddenly seeing that match betting companies are promoting incredibly risky schemes? I've been around for a very long period of time, and while match betting is very risk-free and perfectly suitable for a large number of people, the sort of thing I'm seeing promoted now absolutely is not. And I'm going to explain why in this video. So there are many ways to make money from sports betting, but the one that most people come across quite quickly are things like matched betting. And in fact, this was how I sort of started my career in the current phase of my career, was that I would go on to those betting exchanges in the early days, find the best odds from bookmakers, and then just lay it off on the exchange. But as you will know, if you've done any match betting, you are very limited as to what you can do, because bookmakers, sportsbook, they absolutely hate match bettors, because all they do is pick off those offers. They don't bet again. They offer no value to the ecosystem, and therefore they will try and limit and get rid of you as much as possible. So the amount of money that you can make is very, very limited. However, if you're doing Betfair trading, then one of the advantages that you've got is that you have a market that's worth many, many tens of billions a year that you can participate in. However, you've got to take risk when you're Betfair trading. It's not the same as match betting. You're trying to eliminate all risk and never make a loss. Whereas with Betfair trading, you've got to be comfortable with anticipating things, putting yourself in the position to profit, but knowing that maybe you will not. And as a consequence, you know, people don't tend to migrate from match betting to Betfair trading. Some people do and have done it very successfully. But because there's a little leap of imagination required, and it's a different style and a different way of making money, a lot of people don't make that leap. They just stay where they feel comfortable, and they miss out on that wonderful world of Betfair trading. Now, you can also do value betting as well. And this is where you're using your judgment against the market. You're saying, well, I see those odds are wrong. And if you bet consistently against those odds, then over the long term, you will be able to make money. However, it's not as simple as you think. And also the amount of money that you can make from there, it's got less to do with winning and more to do with the edge that you have against those particular sets of odds. And it's something that is worth exploring a little bit deeper. So the reason that I'm talking about value betting is because all of these big match betting companies are now trying to push a product that is essentially value betting. They're saying, don't worry, you know, match betting is limited, but we found a brand new way for you to be able to make money using our carefully constructed computer model and all of that sort of stuff. We can find value for you. And here are the offers that we're making. It's a great new way to take yourself forward from match betting. Now, I've often done videos on how you can price the market, so maybe you want to watch some of those to understand how you can price it. But the thought of just offering out prices to people and saying, this is value, bet on it, absolutely horrifies me, because this is no better than a typical tipster. And if somebody did produce that particular system where it was consistently producing value bets that you could take advantage of, like hundreds of them, then you would be able to scale it very, very quickly to such a level that you may struggle to get your bet on the market. Because the biggest problem you have with value betting is price. Price. If you can find a price that it does actually truly represent value, then you want to try and get on a reasonable amount of money, but without influencing the price. Because as soon as you start betting that, the price will change, and therefore you end up destroying any edge that you had within the market. So the thought of giving this out to thousands of people is just a nonsense. And this is why I've always been skeptical of tipsters and similar sort of services like copy bets and other things. And this is why I'm very skeptical of this type of service, because I just don't understand how it could possibly work. So there are two key problems you have when you're attempting to value bet. And in fact, I think there are three really. But the first one is that the market is very efficient. So you know that I like horse racing because the price is all over the place, and that does create inefficiencies. And if you know what you're looking for and you understand the market well enough, you can pick off some of those every now and again. You can't do it on every single race. And for example, on handicaps, much, much harder than on other types of races. But there are inefficiencies created through that particular process. If a horse bolts to the start, its chance of winning has declined, and you can take advantage of that. And that will be reflected somewhere else within the market. But when you look at tennis, football, cricket, a lot of that uncertainty in the models are baked into the market, and therefore the market is very efficient. There's not much movement in the market before the event starts, and therefore those models are or tends to be very, very efficient. So you have to somehow get ahead of that curve based upon things that you know that the market may not know and stuff like that. What I'm saying here is it's not simple. You can't just turn up to a market, bet something and say, oh yeah, I've got plenty of value. And also, you know, you may not have enough value in that price. It may look like you're getting value, or it may look like you're winning, but you may just not have enough margin to overcome the edge that is put into that price, either by a bookmaker, an exchange, or whatever. It's actually quite hard to be able to consistently get value out of the market. You have to be really clever to do that. But also you have this other problem of variability, variance within the market. So it's quite possible that the market could be in your favor at one point and against you on other occasions. And that could mean that it looks like you're winning, but in fact you're not. It's just a variation from the mean that then eventually mean reverts at some other point. I'm using sort of mathematical terms here. I don't mean to, but it's the only way I know of explaining it. Basically, you have good and bad runs. That's what I'm trying to say. And the market has good and bad runs. But over the very, very long term, it tends to be efficient. I will show you in a second on a spreadsheet of mine. I'll talk you through some figures. But also you've got this problem of getting the bets on. You tend to find when you're value betting, you're trying to do something clever. You may be able to do it for a short period of time, but then as your bank grows, the issue that you have is being able to get the money on without making the price move. So you're not playing this game of hiding within the market. So yeah, those are some of the three problems that you have when you're attempting to value bet. But what we should do is I'll show you some data, and that will probably explain it a little bit clearer for you. We're looking here at a spreadsheet of data that I've collected, and this is every single favourite in the year 2023. Well, I say every single one. Unfortunately, when you gather data, you do miss off bits here and there, and sometimes it doesn't gather data and so on. So I can't tell you that this is absolutely, definitely every single favourite, but it's the bulk of them. There are about 10,000 or so races within this spreadsheet. And I gather data because I'm always interested in playing with it, having a look at it, seeing if there's something interesting in there that I can use. And I gather this on every single sport that I actively bet or trade on. But from the top level perspective, this is what you should find interesting. These two columns are basically saying these are the odds, or the implied probability of the odds that the favourites had at any point throughout the year. And I've broken it down by month and over the course of the year. So according to the odds that we saw on the market, the favourites should have won 33.78% of the time. However, when we look at how many favourites did win, they won at a slightly lower rate, 33.17% of the time. So it's a net negative of 0.61. So if you'd backed the favourite over the course of the year with an appropriate staking method that equalised your chance of winning against the odds of that favourite itself, you would have lost 0.61% of whatever you were putting into the market. However, this doesn't include commission or other frictional costs. So in fact, that number is always going to be a little bit more negative based upon how much you've paid for this, or how much commission you're paying, or all of those other things as well. But overall, the market is reasonably efficient. It's only 0.61% out over the course of the year. Now, if we go back to the data, I'll show you something else as well. If I scroll across to the right here, I've actually looked at varying, should I back, should I lay, all of these sort of things. But there's also a cumulative column in here as well. If you look here, I'll explain what you're looking at. Here we backed the favourite at 173 and we lost, so we lost £100. But in the next race we backed the favourite at 6.54690. Well, anyway, about 6.5, and we won. So therefore we were up on the deal. So this cumulative column is plotting how we're performing over time. And you can see here that we had a couple of decent wins, and then all of a sudden we went on a losing run. So we went from being up the best part of £1,000 with £100 stakes to actually ending up
being slightly negative here. But it didn't matter, because before long our selections were great, the system was working, and we actually managed to plough on up to much, much bigger numbers. We managed to get up to about £1,700. But then, of course, it started to turn again, and all of a sudden we ended up negative, and it got worse and worse, and we went on a bad run, and things just sort of went to pot a bit. And the interesting thing when you look at these sort of numbers is this tells you a lot about how variable the market is. And in fact, you can see I put a chart on here. And what we're saying here is that when we opened this particular system, this value betting, for want of a better word, you can see that it actually performed pretty well by pure chance. Over the course of the year, we know that it reverted and coalesced to this 0.61 difference between reality and what the odds were suggesting. So you can see the longer you are in a market and the more bets you place, the more likely it is that you will end up at that particular value. But in the short term, you can actually get quite a few variations in terms of where things go. And you can see we got off to a fantastic start, and you could have been fooled at this point into thinking that the system's working brilliantly well, that you're doing unbelievably well, you've discovered the thing that's going to make you incredibly rich, and you raise stakes at this particular moment in time, only to see the whole thing start to revert at that particular point. And then you can see we had a sort of bumpy ride from that point onwards. So yeah, if you're going to overcome this, you need to have very wide margin between the odds that you're seeing and the chance of it occurring. You need to know that your edge within the market is quite a few percent. Otherwise, you're going to have these massive up and down swings that will really severely force your hand, especially psychologically, in terms of whether you feel you're doing the right thing. And if you happen to join the market during one of those upswings, it feels like you've stumbled upon an incredible money-making system. But of course, that tends to revert to mean, and it could be that you're very unlucky and you just happen to start using a system or a range of selections just at the point at which it begins to turn negative. But that aside, and on top of that, the market tends to be fairly efficient in the long term overall. So yeah, these are some of the key factors that you need to understand and take into account if you're going to do any sort of value betting.
So hopefully that's given you a little bit more depth of knowledge as to what goes on with value betting. It's really not that simple because you've got several hurdles to overcome. And also the issue that you've got is if you've had to pay to acquire a tip or a recommendation, then you have to cover those costs. And when you're looking at value betting over the very long term, you're not going to get a 10% edge within the market. It's just not going to happen. I've never seen that ever in my life, and it's not about to start happening. So you're always going to be low single-digit percentage edge within the market on a value bet. That's probably the realm that you're going to be very likely to look at, excluding exceptionals. And therefore, if you pay £1,000 for a system, and you've got only a 1% edge, then you're going to have to put a lot of bets through and a lot of money to get any possible return on the investment that you made to get your recommendations. And then you throw in this issue of, if you're chasing the price on a horse that's coming in dramatically, then you'll almost certainly lose your account with the bookmaker because they will see what you're doing, and your account will be closed. So there's not many positives here really. And if somebody wants to give me one of these for free, I'm happy to do an unbiased, unpaid review of it and look at all of the selections that come through and what they recommend. But until I see that data or see thousands and thousands of these bets, then I'm absolutely, totally not convinced that there's any value in this type of value betting, simply because it is much harder, very difficult to find an edge within an efficient market. And I just don't think the margin's there. I just don't really think that it's very possible. But yeah, this is why I felt the need to do the video, because I just think this is a step too far. I think it's sending people down the wrong path and certainly not making people aware of the risks involved. So it was a real surprise to see match betting companies suddenly promoting value betting. It didn't really seem to make an awful lot of sense to me. And if you go on to their websites, you can still see those comparison charts between traditional betting and match betting, where they're saying, don't do traditional betting, do match betting for the following reasons. And of course, that makes perfect sense, because if you're not familiar with betting on any particular sports and you're not going to put that effort in to try and find an edge there, then match betting is pretty suitable, because you can make a little bit of money. You're not going to make a lot, but you can make a little bit of money and then you can decide what you want to do from there. And the curious thing is Betfair trading is very similar to match betting, because match betting is looking at taking two prices and netting the profit between the two. And that's more or less what you do when you're Betfair trading. However, Betfair trading does involve skill, and it involves a little bit more risk because you're anticipating that something's going to happen. So yeah, it's a little bit harder, it's riskier, but of course the market is absolutely massive. It's tens of billions. So, you know, I've always thought that that was a more natural progression for people who are matched betting, because it sort of makes sense. You can understand the concept and you know the direction in which you want to go. But value betting is completely different. You've got to somehow be better than the market. You need an edge that's big enough to overcome any frictional costs within the market. And you also need to know what to do when you get those inevitable losing runs, because they will happen. And when you hold your position in the market and you do bets over a long period of time, it tends to revert to mean, and the market tends to be showing itself as very efficient. So yeah, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome to get to that particular stage. And I think if you're match betting and making a little bit of money there, then the leap to value betting is, I think, too big. It's a very, very different ballgame altogether. Anyhow, I thought I'd produce a video on it because I think it's important to point that out to people who are match betting. And I'll be interested in your thoughts as well. But whatever way you look at it, I hope that this video has been useful for you.